Hey everyone, welcome back to another podcast put out by the Standards and Training Committee of the National Council on Interpreting in Healthcare. Today we have a super special guest, and I'm really happy to welcome Ludmila Golovine, the president and CEO of Masterword, to our podcast. Masterword is a globally ranked language service provider. Mila has over 30 years in the language services industry and has been a staunch advocate for language rights and social justice. Mila is the Strategic Partnerships Manager for Global Community Programs of Women in Localization and a founding member of the Global Coalition of Language Rights. She's also a member of the TBAT, the Texas Business Against Human Trafficking, an active participant in the UN Global Compact Initiative, and she also chairs the advisory subcommittee for the Translation and Interpretation Program at Houston Community College. Last year, during the summer of 2023, Mila was one of the language industry leaders who launched the Interpreting Safe AI Task Force, meant to establish, disseminate, and promote guidelines for responsible AI adoption in interpretation. Mila's work has been recognized by her receiving numerous awards, including the California Healthcare Interpreting Association Trainer of the Year Award in 2021, a congressional recognition, a G7 Excellence in International Service Award, the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Gulf Coast Area Regional winner in 2023, and most recently, just a couple weeks ago, the NCIHC 2024 Language Access Champion Award. Congratulations, Mila, and welcome to
Thank
the podcast.
you.
I'm so happy to have you here with me today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You were reading all of this. I just got, like, oh my God, that's a lot.
Well, it
Thank you.
is, and you are so busy. You are not just making your company evolve. You are not just participating in continuing education for interpreters and trainers of interpreters, but you are doing a lot to try and move the needle on so many fronts that, as Mike Myers used to say, I'm not worthy. I am really excited to hear more about your journey and the things that you're working on right now. So let's look back first. And looking back, what are you the most proud of out of all of the things that you've been involved in and have achieved?
I would change the word from proud to grateful. And the most thing that I'm grateful for and the most rewarding thing has been actually the people that I've met along the journey. The people like Winnie Hay and Catherine Ellen and Natalia Michureva and you, Eliana, and Carl Fungaren, all the people that are nationally and globally involved in language access. So that is probably meeting the incredible peers and learning along the way and knowing that we're a force to be reckoned with. We can make things happen. So that's the biggest accomplishment, I would say.
I think being a curious and lifelong learner is always what I would recommend for anyone as a way to get through life. Life doesn't get boring that way. You meet lots of interesting people along the way. And if you're lucky, like I have been with you and many of the others that you've mentioned, those colleagues become more than people whose work you admire. They become friends. And then you really start to get things done because you can trust the quality of their intellect, the quality of their ethical approach, and they're fun to work with. So you get more done, I think. So that's really the double benefit of having colleagues that you respect become friends that you love to work with. At least for me, that has been the biggest draw and one of the reasons why I've been volunteering with the National Council for as many years, because it has become a group of people that I love, and and I am committed to the work that we do. So currently, you have your fingers in a lot of pies. So what do you see as the biggest challenge? Is it AI? Is it awareness of the lack of ability of everyone who speaks any language to be able to participate in these technological advances? Or is it the lack of humanity that allows us to still have human trafficking on such a wide scale as we do today? Like, what is the biggest challenge for you, Mila, right now?
So if we kind of zoom out and look on a bigger scale, the issues are really interrelated. So today we have the biggest push factor into human trafficking, or it's a fancy word for slavery, which is a huge thriving industry today. And depending on which numbers we listen to, the latest number published within the human trafficking world, it's now a $256 billion industry. But then Interpol published a number saying that the overall criminal activity is 3 trillion a year, and human trafficking and slavery is about 30 to 40% of that, which puts us that number closer to $1 trillion. So it's huge. And the major component, the biggest component of human trafficking is human slavery, labor slavery, and then, of course, sexual exploitation and organ harvesting. And the biggest push factor into that is poverty. The biggest push factor into poverty is language. Because if we look at UNESCO numbers, 40% of the world does not have access to education in the language that the people can understand. And learning math in Chinese does not make you the smartest student in the classroom if you don't speak Chinese. So learning a foreign concept and a foreign language at the same time puts people up for failure immediately. And we can look at some, yes, there is very small linguistic communities, like, my favorite group is the Sami people, and anybody who's watched Frozen can see that. And they're actually the success story of localization and digitization. But there are people like speakers of Fulani language, 36 million, Berber, I believe somewhere around 25 million, Mayan, combined group is about 7 million, that don't have any digital access. So when you log online, you cannot Google or go to a Wikipedia or find out anything. You can't even interact with the bank. You can't, you don't have any understanding of what's going on. And the digital world today is where economic opportunities are. We moved from physical world, and 40 years ago, all you needed was maybe a typewriter, or you would write a letter and send it, to where everything happens digitally, and it's a global digital economy. So the incredible power that we have as linguists in that is very much underestimated. And it's actually the power that the translators have to enable that global economy, to enable the global learning. And as a language industry, we have the solutions to solve the issues for the other 40% of the world. So to solve that is not possible without technology. You cannot translate every piece of knowledge in the world without machine translation or without AI, the way it's moving in. In fact, the emergence of this new technology is going to create tremendous opportunities for the other half of the world that's been cut off, by shortening that distance to understanding, to knowledge, to being able to join the economy. But it has to be done in a very responsible way. And it has to be done in a way where we understand the shortcomings of the technology as it's evolving, where accuracy is lost. For example, maybe transcription English, if you don't have an accent, and if there is no background noise, can be at a 99% accuracy. But transcription, let's say for a Maori language, may be at a 50% accuracy. And if you're trying to speak Maori to English through a machine translated tool, 50% accuracy is not good enough if you're talking about a health issue, or if you're in court, or if it's any type of issue that can affect human life. I mean, if you're trying to buy shoes, and if you figured out that it's not green shoes, but it's blue shoes, with the 50% accuracy, that's okay. But if you are talking about, and recently we had to provide actually sworn testimony about the word fog or foggy, and it was a fatal car accident. And in the case of fog, it's involuntary manslaughter, and in the case of foggy, it may be voluntary manslaughter. So it's a completely different outcome of a court case, just on a slight linguistic variation of the same word. Visibility was affected. So I think responsible adoption of these tools is key to the end result.
So if responsible adoption of these tools is key, looking forward, what do you see as the most challenging way to make these tools as widely accessible as possible?
Well, there's going to be a dialogue that we need to engage in with the tech industry and with the buyers, the large institutional buyers, and the dialogue needs to involve. In the end, the success looks like understanding of what it takes to provide accurate communication. So I think that the guidance that are up for public review right now, I'd like to invite everybody to participate and contribute feedback, are really, really important. And the core principles that were outlined in the guidelines are also very important. And that's, transparency, ability to opt in and opt out, and then concept of validation. And then, of course, Title 1557, a crucial piece of legislation that just came out, talks about the need for human subject matter expert validation for anything that's been translated by a machine or interpreted by a machine to ensure accuracy.
I'm so grateful that they included that in the updates that were just recently released at the end of April 2024. Folks, if you haven't looked at these updates, it's important because they are much more specific than they have been in the past, and they do call out very detailed actions that need to be taken, including the creation of positions that monitor the language access for any entity, I believe, any healthcare entity that has more than, is it 15 employees?
I think so.
That's something that wasn't called out in the past, and I'm happy to see that. In the promo for this podcast, I'm going to put the link for folks to be able to give their opinion or their suggestions to the Safe AI task force, because it's important. All of you who are interested in language access that have tuned into this podcast, you must know somebody that works in IT or who works for one of the companies that develop these types of tools, iterative AI in particular, and try to share some of this information with them, because we really need to get that dialogue, those relationships going from the language access world to the tech world, so that we can collaboratively develop systems and approaches, protocols, procedures that work and that are inclusive. That we can be mindful of just how much English is being poured through the large language models, rather than a variety of languages. And using a variety of languages is only going to make the tool better. So there are ways of appealing to excellence and efficiency to the tech-minded person that isn't at all about the touchy-feely, help the limited English proficient person communicate, but it is all about accuracy and speed and efficiency of the tool that they're developing. So we need to bring in allies from other worlds in order for us to roll this out in a way that is beneficial. There are lots of ways that I think AI can pair right now. But as you said, blue shoes versus green shoes, it's nice to be able to make that choice and understand that choice. But no one is going to lose their life or their freedom or not that much money, unless maybe they're Manolo Blahniks, to AI process that may still be making poor choices or limited choices or incorrect choices. So there's lots of areas that we can direct this technology to now so that we can flesh out what it's able to do before we allow it into the arenas where somebody's life, liberty, or pocketbook is at stake.
And I really encourage people in the language industry or working with language access to start actively using the tools so you can experience the shortcomings firsthand. It's absolutely phenomenal, but it's also not perfect. And it requires human input, even if you put all the right prompts in and you ask to create a draft of, let's say, a letter that you're writing, it's still, at the end, you're still rewriting and editing that letter.
Yeah. It still needs oversight. Together, you make something better, but you can't just put it on autopilot and walk away.
Make it better faster. You make it better faster, and so our productivity is going to increase. If we can look at it like the transportation industry, the transportation evolved from horse and buggy to the way it is today. And what happened? We now move around more. It's actually a bigger industry. And even the horse industry still exists. It's just taken a little bit of a different form. But we are in the industry of facilitating communication between people through language. And communication, only 7% are words. The other 93% are nonverbal cues and the intent, the context, the sarcasm. And there's a very wonderful slide in the survey that was done for Safe AI by CSA that shows the plethora of things that go into communication. None of that can be done by a machine. So this is, I think, our role is going to come into making that communication better, more efficient. And if I were to simplify it, instead of translating the labels for a packing slip, which you can translate it once and then the machine can do it, what a non-rewarding task. And I've done that at the beginning of my career, sat there and translated hundreds of pages of packing slips, very boring. But we can look at, is the meaning there? We can look to higher level communication, more critical communication, and ensure that the meaning and the understandings are there. Ensure that we're present in every court case that's essential, right? We're present in every medical part of the encounter that's essential. So I'm excited. I think that our industry is going to grow exponentially as a result of this. Because today we have a shortage of a human expert translator worldwide. That's the shortage of a qualified language professional is something that we're all experiencing because I believe the latest numbers, and again, CSA showed that we are translating something like 0.00038 of 1% of the global content that's being generated today. So we're not even at 1% of what's being generated of conveying that from language to language. And how incredible is it if it's going to be more? How much knowledge there, how much more communication, how much more opportunity can be there if we actually are able to translate 1%.
I know. And in that less than 1%, it is predominantly English that is moving through to create the algorithms that are used to drive the AI. You mentioned a particular slide that CSA developed that talked about sample elements that require nuance. And I just wanted to bring it up because I too find this to be one of my very favorite slides out of that research. And it's important for all of you that are watching this podcast that are interested in language access to understand where exactly the limitations for AI fall. And they fall in nuance, the world of nuance. Right here, nuance, the little blue in the center, and they've broken that out into 5 groups: cultural context, linguistic context, interaction context, emotional context, and tone context. So under tone, we have cynicism, humor, hyperbole, innuendo, joking, sarcasm, teasing. And under emotional, we have attitude, demeanor, mood, feelings, tone of voice. And interestingly enough, folks that are neurodivergent, whether it's Asperger's or anything else, may struggle with the very same things, interpreting these subtle cues of communication. And they struggle. People with autism and people with Asperger's struggle with these particular areas of nuance. But there's a whole lot more: interaction context, linguistic context. This is what people who are working with AI are working hard on programming: the linguistic, the dictionary word equivalents, the grammar, the syntax of a language. But they're leaving out a whole universe of communication that, as you mentioned, only 7% is the actual words. Everything else is what is called out on that slide, but that is not written down or not actually said, but is perceived by the person participating in that communication.
And we're going to get
some of that perception.
And we're going to get to regulation and rules eventually anyway. And we need the same rules as were created for traffic. When we went from horses to cars, they created intersections and traffic lights and, which side of the street you're driving at and speed limits. So that's what needs to be created right now for AI, as opposed to and having the human experience where we knew people died in the street. And in case of language access, most of us are familiar with the famous Intoxicado case that led to misdiagnosis. Instead of going to that after people died and creating regulation through lawsuits post the loss of human life or having very terrible experiences or situations, like accountability. If a bot makes something up with 50% accuracy, who is accountable? We want to be before that, in front of that, and go, let's create the rules and make sure red light is no go, green light is go. And let's create those rules for the way machines enter our industry and our world. And if we and build in that safety. And if we look at the rest, the other industry experiences, well, first of all, I want to bring people's attention to the fact that we're in a very unique time in history. We're in a time in history where every single profession, every single group is affected by AI. And every single profession is thinking about ethics and the way to adopt AI in their industry, in law, in medicine, in sports, There is not a single profession that in education. So as a humanity, we are all rethinking, what does ethics look like? What does responsible adoption look like? How do we now come? So it's incredibly unique.
I love your analogy with horses versus automobiles, because even in the automobile industry, those standards, that legislation, laws pertaining to safe driving, speed limits, they've all changed over time as the technology of the automobile has changed over time. And we've had to create new laws, like don't piggyback your cell phone technology on top of your automobile technology and try to do both at the same time. I really see that as a lovely guideline for how to manage the integration of AI technology into any aspect of the world that we live in. We start out with some guidelines, with some speed limits, and yes, they can change over time as the technology changes, but they're put in place to keep the majority of us safe. And sometimes people don't like the new changes, like when seatbelts went from just a waist belt to the belt that came across, and then you would get a ticket for not having your seatbelt on. It was visible to the police officers or the cameras. A lot of people pushed back on that, but it saves lives. So there are things that will have to happen in order to keep people safe. But I think the sooner we collaborate, tech side, language access side, the more satisfactory those guidelines and regulations can be to both sides. I hate it when language access people are asked to the table to present the innovation, to present, this is how we're going to be doing things at the hospital from now on, or this is how we're going to be doing things in the courts from now on. And we can see right away, wait a minute, your language list is incomplete, or whatever it is that we bring up, why weren't we involved sooner so that we could talk about this as it was being built and not have it cost more to fix something that is not workable for a non-English participant, right? So let's do this sooner rather than later.
And I believe that the amount of work is going to increase exponentially. There may be this temporary slowdown for a period of time, but the amount of communication that's going to go from language to language is going to explode. And therefore, the amount of communication that needs to be reviewed and analyzed, and the amount of additional subject matter expertise that we need to train AI on, or to train technology on, is also going to increase. So we're moving from the quote unquote manual work. I'll never forget that packing slip, the most boring job, to the expert field, where we're the subject matter expert. And to see poor rendition in a text that is that gives you false fluency requires a lot higher skill. Because if you give me a text today on neuroscience or some topic that I don't know about, it's going to look amazing to me. But if you're the expert, you can see the nuance challenge in the text, and that nuance challenge actually can mean everything. It can mean a difference between success and failure.
And this also brings up the point that using AI technology intelligently, which means partnering it with a subject matter expert who is a human being to vet the output, can have really positive effects. Vanessa Costa, formerly of Cambridge Health Alliance and now with HCIN, shared that they did a study in Massachusetts for the patient portal communications, right? So already you're using an app to leave a message with your clinic, with your nurse, with your doctor, as they do to you about upcoming appointments or lab test results, or asking how you're doing on your medication, whatever it is, that email, text communication that can happen through a specific patient portal. They used to have the doctors write their comments directly, and then they started using AI with one of the staff interpreters to vet each message before it got sent to the patients. And then they asked the patients about which type of message they preferred. And overwhelmingly, the patients preferred the AI generated message because it was more polite, it was more respectful, it was deemed to be friendlier in tone, and they felt nurtured and cared for by the AI doctor message. But what needs to be emphasized is that they had an interpreter slash translator vetting all of the messages and making sure that the forms of address were the correct respectful forms of address and the greetings were culturally appropriate, and the interaction was very well received by the patient population. So just because we're asking for this collaboration from the language access side doesn't mean that we don't want there to be AI use in technology for communication. We just want it to be good quality communication. And then, yes, the end user, the client, the patient will have greater levels of satisfaction. So for me, this is a win-win all around if everybody gets to participate the way they should.
Risk is also individual. So, for example, if you don't have an allergic reaction, you can have AI translate your menu and you can figure out this is fish and this is beef. But if you have severe food allergies, you're going to want to really take a closer look at what is in the ingredients and what is in the menu. So the level of risk is individual. If you don't have a disability, you can have a somewhat accurate AI interpretation at a ticket kiosk at a railroad station. But if you have difficulty walking, you're going to want potentially to opt in and opt out and have a human double explain that you're really taking that left turn and you're going to that train station platform because it takes you longer and it's a more difficult journey to get there. So risk is individual. So I believe ability to opt in and opt out is key as well.
So we've talked a bit about how to manage this newish challenge because there's technology has always been the counterpart to the skill of interpreting and translating. What do you see as either what you're most excited about coming up in the future or most concerned about coming up in the future?
There may be related things as well. So what I'm most excited is about the other, now we have the opportunity for the other 40% of the world to come online with this new technology. There is a huge gap in language access. And even if we send a city message about, hey, the storm is coming in, we would send it in top 10 languages max. But like in the case of New York, there's 700 languages being spoken today. And if the message is your water supply got poisoned or there's something that requires immediate preparedness, what happens to the speakers of the other 690 languages, right? How do they get the message across? So the technology will enable us in a soon, if we have, as the language industry, the ability right now to mentor and help and enable and find solutions for the rest, for the other 40% of the world. So I'm excited about that. One of the things that I'm concerned about is the issue, of course, of accuracy, and because that affects the issues of human rights. And the technology is capable of manipulating or mispresenting information, whether on purpose or by somebody's evil design, because we see a lot of evil things happening through the digital world as well. So navigating that would be a high risk. And I would not be me talking at any event if I don't bring up the issue of both vicarious trauma and trauma informed. We have on a global scale massive impact and massive, again, increase in mental health issues, the number of suicide rates, the number of, COVID was one of the big push factors that caused everybody's stress levels to be super high. And the way, of course, the number of global conflicts, all you have to do is turn on the news to see the amount of conflicts that are happening. So interpreters are affected by vicarious trauma at even greater levels. And then, but so the rest of us, and so trauma-informed communication is going to be key and very, very important. And one of the interesting points that I kind of want the world to know, or the language access world, why is it important, is when somebody is affected by trauma, a person's memory line is affected, and the way we present information. So, for example, a person will remember 100% of what they consider core memory and may remember 10% of what they consider non-core memory. And we as language professionals may judge them as lying. And one of the examples that was brought up in a training for forensic investigators was a case where a woman was sexually assaulted, and she made it her point to remember the face of the person assaulting her so that she can give an accurate sketch to the police. The person gets arrested by that sketch and then almost gets let go because she forgot that half of the person's face was covered in a tattoo. That was not a core memory she remembered. Now, then the DNA test confirmed the accuracy and the person ended up being sent to jail. But that highlighted to me the importance of knowing and understanding trauma-informed communication and how trauma can affect a person, that something as major as the half of a person's face is covered with a tattoo got omitted as a memory. And we as language professionals can judge going, oh, but she was lying, right? Or as court professionals or healthcare professionals can judge, oh, she was lying, but she was not. So understanding the way trauma affects both us as language professionals and the people we help communicate for or are interacting with, I think is going to be very important.
And this just highlights how communication is not just a one, what should I call it? Like one sheet of paper with the text on that paper. It's like the layers on an onion. There are so many layers of what we retain, what we absorb, what we perceive, how we filter it, and how we give it back to the world, that this is why it is not easy to mechanize. And this is why also human being interpreters and translators can struggle with giving the most accurate rendition, because it is not as straightforward as, a widget. There's a blue widget, a green widget. No, there's so much nuance. There's so many layers that are involved in giving the most accurate and complete equivalence to what somebody is trying to communicate. And I'm sure we'll get there someday. We're not there yet. And it doesn't mean that we are anti-technology. I'm very pro-technology, but I want to be included as part of your development team so that we can develop tools that are as fully functional as our technological abilities allow them to be, and that we are transparent about where that functionality falls short and are willing to cede ground to the human communicator, interpreter, translator to fill that gap until at some point down the road we figure out how to get around it technologically. I don't think it has to be either or. I think it can be a hybrid for quite a long time until we get to that either or point. We're not there yet.
Well, I don't think as long as humans exist, it's either or, because for humans there's always a cultural context. And we're evolving at such a fast pace. And even if we look linguistically, the language that I spoke, or even here spoken in the U.S. 30 years ago, is not this, or it's not the same language as spoken 20 years ago. And when my kids come back from middle school right now, they're speaking some completely different lingo at this point. So with every generation, there is a new lingo and there is a evolution of the language that's happening. So everything is evolving as we speak. Everything is very fluid.
The language is a living thing, and it mutates and grows and evolves, whereas technology can only try to keep up. So I think that we need to have that back and forth collaboration, communication, experience, so that we can do as good a job as we are capable of doing with the technology and the knowledge that we have at present. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mila. This has given everyone a little bit of food for thought of, who do I know on the tech side that I can start to befriend and bring over to an understanding of what's happening on the language access side. The more collaboration, the better the end product will be.
And on the hospital side and government organization side and education organization side, on when people are procuring services, thinking that I just solved the whole problem with one click of a button, it needs to be a hybrid approach. With again, I would bring back that the guidance were very well thought out and a collaborative effort of. A global collaborative effort in a way. So I would suggest that people refer to the guidance after they're published, and because they do create a roadmap for responsible adoption of technology.
Absolutely. Totally agree. Well, it's been a great pleasure to be with you today and all of you listening. I would mark this one as one of my favorites. And we'll see you again soon. I'll see you on many of our collaborative efforts, and I'll see all of you again next month. Thanks everyone for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Ciao, ciao.